Good evening. My name is Sarah Libitsky. I'm a senior in the Nonprofit Leadership Studies program. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the keynote conversation for the second annual Philanthropy Week, hosted by the Nonprofit Resource Center, the Nonprofit Leadership Studies program, the Department of Organizational Communication and Leadership, and the Arthur J. Bauernfeind College of Business, and Murray State University. Philanthropy Week is a celebration of generosity, philanthropy, and civic engagement. I'm honored to welcome and introduce to you Dr. Julia Atkins. Dr. Atkins completed her PhD in Arts Administration at Florida State University. She is currently serving as the Interim Executive Director of the Fayetteville Symphony Orchestra. Dr. Atkins has professional experience in orchestra management, arts marketing, and music education, as well as performing experience as a clarinetist. In addition to her PhD, she holds a Bachelor of Music degree in clarinet performance from the Crane School of Music at SUNY Potsdam and a Master's of Music degree in clarinet performance from Florida State University. She worked as the Director of Artistic Operations and Marketing for the Fayetteville Symphony Orchestra from 2013 to 2018, and was also the Adjunct Professor of Clarinet at Methodist University in Fayetteville, North Carolina, from 2014 to 2018. Additionally, Julia holds a professional certificate in nonprofit management from Duke University and a program evaluation certificate from Florida State University. Tonight, she will share with us reflections and lessons from her experience rebuilding a nonprofit arts organization from scratch during a pandemic. Dr. Atkins, on behalf of the Nonprofit Resource Center and the faculty and students of the Nonprofit Leadership Studies program, I want to personally thank you for sharing your story.
Hello, welcome to night 4 of Philanthropy Week at Murray State University. I am excited to bring the keynote speaker for this evening, my friend and colleague, Dr. Julia Atkins. We're going to talk to her about her work with the Fayetteville Symphony Orchestra. So welcome, Julia.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So my first question is just to tell us a bit about your background, Dr. Atkins.
Yes, of course. So I was a trained classical musician in my background. So I went to school and got my bachelor and master's degree in clarinet performance, actually. Had the dream back in the day to go perform professionally for an orchestra. It was during my master's degree that I realized that I didn't want to be taking auditions all the time and not getting a job. But where I went and got my master's, which was at Florida State through the College of Music there, they had an arts administration program. And so I took some classes in arts admin and fell in love. And so I ended up working as the Director of Artistic Operations and Marketing for a small budget orchestra in North Carolina, the orchestra that I'm at currently. And then I went back to pursue my PhD in arts administration at Florida State. And literally just last week I finished. So I'm done. And then, and I've been the interim executive director for the Fayetteville Symphony Orchestra since October of 2020. So I've been kind of back and forth in North Carolina and Florida for the past year and a half, just trying to get the organization back on its feet.
I completely understand that. My bachelor's was in musical theater.
Yeah.
And I first pursued that career before I began my master's program. So I understand that transition very well.
Yes.
So for those of us that are in different parts of the country, could you tell us a bit about Fayetteville as a community?
Yeah, so Fayetteville, North Carolina, it's in the southeastern corner of the state of North Carolina. We're about an hour and a half from the Atlantic Ocean. And we're about an hour south of Raleigh, North Carolina, if people know where Raleigh is. Fayetteville is a very transient community. We have the second largest Army base in the world housed here. Fort Bragg is here. So we have a lot of soldiers that live here, a lot of the soldiers' families, lots of different military tracks that are housed here. So we've got a very transient community, but we also have a very old community of Fayetteville because Fayetteville has been around for a while. And so there are families and people here in Fayetteville that have been here for years and years. And so it's a really interesting community. We have about 250,000 people total here. But I would say 150,000 of those are completely military. So if you were to take that chunk out, we are very much a small town feel. It's growing, it's continuing to grow, but there's culture here, we have we have 3 universities here, a community college, we have a private university called Methodist University, and then we have a state university, which is an HBCU school called Fayetteville State University here. And then we obviously have arts and culture here, which is the sector I work in, along with a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, it's a growing community, but it's definitely what I would consider small town.
Okay, thank you for that background. So tell us about Fayetteville Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah, so Fayetteville Symphony Orchestra, it was founded actually in 1956. It was an organization that started in the founders' living rooms, actually, like any traditional nonprofit, it seems like. It basically started because there were some musicians in the area that just wanted to play together. And so they started string quartet rehearsals in their living room. And so they would meet and they would put on these free concerts. And the organization eventually grew to become a full orchestra. And then they ended up establishing themselves as a 501c3 nonprofit. I'm pretty sure sometime in the 1970s. It grew.
So they were informal for that long.
Yeah, they were very informal for that long. So they weren't doing any type of solicitation or anything. It was very much originally it was really just, well, we just want to get together and play and share the love of music with people who are here. So when they established themselves in the 1970s as a 501c3, it then grew into what we would consider an amateur orchestra or like a community orchestra. So they were soliciting, they were getting donations, but their musicians were playing for free still. They were a volunteer orchestra. And so then it started to grow a little bit more. And I would say it was actually really in the early 2000s. That was when they transitioned from a community-based orchestra into a professional orchestra. And so now the musicians of our orchestra, they have to pass an audition to get in. Every musician that plays with us is considered a professional musician, that's their profession. It's not for just a, community-based, let's just play and have fun type of thing. They do have fun, but not in the same sense.
Right.
So yeah, it's
not a hobby.
Over the years. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, now we it's grown, and at this point in time, we would consider ourselves a $600,000 budget orchestra annually, which for orchestras is actually really small. It is probably one of the more smaller budgets for orchestras in the United States. But yeah, so we do everything from full orchestra concerts to chamber concerts to taking our jazz trio to breweries around town. And then we hold other events as well. So it has definitely grown over the years, but it originally started as just hey, let's get together and play music and have fun.
I'm familiar with that phenomenon because when I started my nonprofit, I bribed the people that I was recruiting to work with me with dinner. I said, come to my house for free dinner. And then in my living room, I pitched them my idea.
I love that.
And it worked. It worked. The organization's still going strong. So I understood that.
Yes. Every organization has to start somewhere. And we sometimes joke that, some of the best ideas come from just inviting people over for dinner, or maybe it's over drinks. So
right. So you worked, I know in a different capacity, but you worked with this organization before the pandemic was on anyone's radar. Yes. Remember those times?
Oh my God, nice. those pre times, the before times.
We were so innocent.
I know.
But so you worked with them before when it was kind of going strong. So what do those differences look like before? And I understand your organization had challenges that were apart from the pandemic as well. So you can address any of those in this response.
Yeah, so I'll address all of that because our organization had a really interesting turn of events happen that were not related to the pandemic. As most people would probably are aware and know, I mean, arts organizations, especially performing arts organizations, just took a really big hit because of the pandemic. It's just, what we do is provide live entertainment. And when you can't do live entertainment, that it makes it hard. Like you sit there and you're like, well, what do we stand for? Because everything went digital. So
yeah, there's nothing worse than watching a play on a TV screen.
Right. And, I always used to say, well, why should we perform or record Beethoven's Fifth Symphony? Like anyone can go onto YouTube and go listen to it
Yeah.
or watch an orchestra play it. So for a lot of orchestras, especially, we were sitting there thinking, is this worth it? Should we be putting digital content out there? Because that's not, is that a good use of our resources? Because for us small budget orchestras, we don't want to be putting in all of this money to record this content. Yet we were also being told from the nonprofit field, from for-profit field, that we needed to go digital in order to remain relevant. And yet we were in this battle of, but what we offer is that live experience. And so there was that factor, but I'll back up a little bit more in that I did work previously for the organization. I mentioned earlier, and it's probably in my bio, I was the director of artistic operations and marketing. So I was essentially doing everything behind the scenes. The only thing I didn't have any like hands-on experience with at that point was the fundraising aspect. So I had nothing to do with the money other than I controlled the marketing budget. But that job was, I was a personnel manager, I was a music librarian, I was the education manager, and I was the marketing manager all rolled into one. So typical small nonprofit, you just wear a lot of hats. I left the organization because though we were small, my boss and I at the time started butting heads, and our working relationship, it was basically her and I and one other full-time employee. So it's not like we had a plethora of staff members. We had a really good working relationship when I first started, and then something changed that to this day I still don't fully understand. The best I can say is that her ego got in her way, and she was making decisions for her best interests instead of the organization's best interests, making decisions that didn't always make a lot of sense. And me being who I am, started questioning some of these decisions, which she didn't like. And so we started getting into arguments. And in a small organization like ours, it's not like we had an HR department that we could go and speak to. My HR was my board, and the board she had in her back pocket. So it was very frustrating. And then in the middle of all of that, we were going through a conductor search. And me at the time in my late 20s was saying, well, I don't want to leave the organization now because I know how to do all of these things. And through this transition, I might as well stay. Now, in my experience now, I look back on that thinking I should have left, but I didn't. I stayed, and it was a tough couple of years because I stayed during that transition. And then once we got a new conductor onboarded, I stayed for one more season. And that's when I applied to the PhD programs, and I got accepted into Florida State, and I said, okay, peace out. I'm gone. Bye. And I left, and it was actually somewhat on good terms.
I'm so sorry. Hold on one second.
No,
I apologize for that interruption. Please continue.
Yeah. So I left somewhat on good terms. Like no one was really mad at me, but it was one of those instances where I could just tell in my gut that something was not right. And so I left the organization, pursued my PhD. Then the pandemic hit, and I was still in Florida doing my PhD work. And around the fall of 2020, it was the fall of 2020, I still had friends in the orchestra. And so I was hearing about all of this drama just ensuing. My previous boss had left on really bad terms about like a year before. She burned a lot of bridges going out. They brought in a new executive director who wasn't any better and started just kind of, wasn't like nasty personality wise, but just didn't know how to do the job. So he was almost making it worse. And so there were all these issues, all of this drama came up. I texted the music director, and at the time, I think it was like September 2020. And I said, hey, I'm hearing about all this drama. If you need any help, let me know. I'm out of coursework. Like I have a lot more free time because I'm just working on my dissertation. Just let me know if you need help.
You said, I'm just working on my dissertation.
I'm just working on my dissertation. I'll take on more work. It's fine.
That's funny.
I know. So, and in hindsight, I'm looking back on that thinking I was really crazy.
Yeah.
Just crazy. Because I'm now really exhausted, but I'll get to that later. Yeah, so a month later, the board chair called me and said, would you be willing to serve as an interim capacity because you know the organization, and I think that you'll be great to get it back on its feet. So they brought me on, and I was the only staff member because everyone quit. Literally everyone quit.
Wow.
And so I was handling everything the organization was doing for the first 6 to 9 months. Thankfully, it was a pandemic, so we weren't doing a lot of performances. Yeah, so it was slower, but I had to come back in, and everything I had worked on before I left the organization was in complete shambles. And so I had to reorganize and put it all back together. And it's taken me till now to really get that organization back on its feet. And so, yeah, during the pandemic, I was doing that. Yes, I was working on a dissertation at the same time. And then last summer, 2021, I hired 2 new employees, the first being our community engagement manager and the second a part-time personnel and music librarian. And no one else knows how to train those positions. So I've been training both of them for the past year on top of doing everything else. And, I was telling, I forgot who I was telling, but I said at some point that the executive director role that I was brought into is not the stereotypical executive director.
Right.
Because I was having to rebuild an organization. So I was doing a lot more operations and hands-on details than a typical executive director might in this type of an organization. And I've done I shouldn't say very little fundraising, but my focus has not been on fundraising because it's been very much just trying to get the organization into a position that it can function. When I came back to take it over, it was not functioning. And so it's been a lot, and it's been very exhausting, and I'm grateful for this experience, but I'm sorry, I don't know who's ringing my doorbell, but they can go away. But yeah, it's been exhausting, and it's been eye-opening, especially for small arts organizations, and especially in a pandemic of all things.
Kind of trial by fire.
Yeah.
So you said a couple of things that I want to draw attention to. So one is, because this is really across the nonprofit sector, so often our organizations are driven by the executive director because it's a founder. And so it's personality driven. And then when that person leaves, what is the identity of the organization? If they were the face of the organization, if they were the inspiration of the organization, if they were the fire behind it, what is its identity when that person leaves? And that can be positive and negative, as you indicated. And this director that you were speaking of wasn't the founder, but that personality driven nature of the nonprofit sector
very much so,
is problematic, right? But it's almost a necessary evil, because we say in fundraising that people give to people. So you're making relationships, you're cultivating relationships. It has to be about personality,
right?
And yet it's also a pitfall.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the other thing I wanted to point out that you commented on was that I was actually just speaking to an organization yesterday about the institutional memory that is sometimes housed, especially in many nonprofits that only have one paid staff person. The organization I was speaking to yesterday, that person had been there for over 20 years. All of that knowledge, and she's brilliant and she's doing a great job, but it's in her brain. So what happens if for any reason that brain is unavailable to that organization?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So your organization was very fortunate that your brain was the one available for this position, because you were able to train those people. And that is, they were uniquely fortunate, I think,
very,
back
very, in. Yeah. So uniquely fortunate. And, I think and the sad part, and I've been thinking about this a lot, is that, I came into this position. It's not like there's a handbook that tells you how to do this job. And the person before me, like my previous boss, like, yeah, she had all this knowledge, and I laugh because before I left my original position, I made this succession plan on how to do that job.
Yeah.
And I found it, thank God, for the person I hired into the personnel and music librarian position. But even that, like, I still had to train her because there are still some things in this succession plan that she didn't get. But for me, it's like, I laughed because my previous boss was the one who said, you need to make a succession plan.
And she didn't make a succession plan.
She didn't make a success. The succession plan I found on the old computer was like, here are the dates of when certain grants are due, and that's it. And so I'm sitting there thinking, seriously? So she left with all this knowledge, as you mentioned. It's like, here is this person that knew all the things. She left on bad terms. And so why would she go and help the organization? She took all that knowledge with her.
Right.
And thankfully, I was there and knew the majority of the organization and how things needed to be or what needed to get changed. So I came in to be able to help with that.
Right.
But there are some things I had to learn, like, I didn't have anything to do with the financials back when I used to work there. And so all of a sudden I had our bank accounts and our like financial statements, and I'm sitting there reading these accounting codes and thinking some of these don't make sense. And I'm like, does this donation go into this accounting code or this accounting code? Because sometimes it was confusing. And so I'd have to go and I'd have to talk to the accountant and figure it out, or go back to the organization we got money from and figure that out. And so yeah, it was lots of headaches.
Yeah.
And so it can be a problem, especially if you've had someone in a position for, like you said, like 20 years, and they have all this knowledge and then they leave. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, if I leave this, because I'm only interim, if I leave, there's nothing saying that I have to train the next person in this job.
Yeah. And that's actually what I said. I said, so you need to create a handbook.
Yeah, exactly.
And it might be a really long document, but this is what, yeah.
So long.
Yeah. Yeah. So you touched on this, but I want the solution you came to. Orchestras are an in-person event, and there's lots of recordings of orchestras playing the classic pieces.
Right.
So what was your solution during the pandemic for programming?
Yeah.
Also with a limited budget.
Right. Limited budget. And, the biggest thing was, how do we keep our musicians safe? Because obviously we didn't have the vaccines yet. And how do wind and brass players play their instruments with a mask on their face? Right. Like, we had that to be thinking of. And so we did a recording session like the fall of 2020 with a very small orchestra, meaning like 35 to 40 musicians, socially distanced. The string players were all required to wear masks. The wind and brass players, some of them found specific masks.
They now make them. Isn't it amazing the things we come up with? Because my son isn't, and they
have the whole, and at the time there wasn't one that functioned properly, that didn't get in the way of like brass with their buzzing, or like a mouthpiece sitting there. So for them, they weren't wearing masks, and it was a risk that we had to take, but we tried to limit the amount of winds and brass that were there.
Yeah.
So we did a recording session, and we released one piece for free to our constituents, like via email every week, because we were sitting there thinking, we can't charge people money to do this. It just doesn't make sense. So we did that. And then we did a couple of other like chamber music performances, like recordings. So we had like a string quartet do some recordings. And again, the same thing, like we'd release one piece of music every week, just to kind of stay in touch with our patrons.
Yeah.
But
stay relevant.
Yeah. But essentially we were kind of taking the road of, well, all the staff quit, I'm the only one, and it's a pandemic, so this is just going to have to be good enough. So we did some content, but yeah, it was very minimal. And so we just had to say, this just has to be good enough, and we just have to be thinking about the future instead of thinking about what should we do right this second.
I love that. I really, really love that, actually, that you understood your limitations, and that perhaps you're not competitive. If I'm going to go to YouTube and look for a symphony, I'm probably going to choose like the New York Philharmonic to listen to. I might not choose the Fayetteville Symphony Orchestra. Unless I'm from there and I have an affection for it, then I might. But right, someone's going to choose a bigger or more well-known. And so understanding that and finding an appropriate way to stay relevant to your constituency and ride it out safely. So sometimes now I will say, one of the frustrations that I have when I work with nonprofit practitioners is that so often the answer that they give to any question is, well, before the pandemic, we fill in the blank. And those were happy times, but it's been 2 years and here we are. So we can't still be looking at that.
No, we can't.
We have to look forward.
That actually, it's funny because I sat in the pandemic, even I sat in on a League of American Orchestras conference, which, for those who don't know, the League of American Orchestras is the main constituency group for all orchestras in the United States. So they're very much like a resource for us as far as like webinars or something like that. And so they have a conference every year. And so during the pandemic, they had a digital conference because we couldn't get together in person.
Right.
And of course, the topic was the pandemic. What are orchestras going to do? How are we going to get through this? We didn't know what tomorrow held. And there were so many people that said, well, once this is over, we're going to go back to doing X, Y, Z. And I would read these comments because it was, of course, in the chat box on my screen. I'm sitting there thinking, you guys are crazy. We like literally crazy. I'm like, I realized that, yes, I'd love to go back to how it was, but this pandemic, even back in 2020, I knew was going to shift the nature of how we think, how we do business, how we do everything, not only for orchestras, but for probably nonprofits and even for profits. And so I was sitting there thinking, I'd love to go back, and yes, some things can still transition through from how we used to do it. But we need to lose this mindset of, oh, well, we'll just go back to doing what we used to do before the pandemic. Like, when I hear orchestras say that, I want to pull my hair out because I'm like, it has an
opportunity to reassess, really. It might not have been working before the pandemic. We've been doing it for 50 years, but it might not have been working.
And for orchestras, that is very common. I'm like, it still is taking them so long to transition and to change the way they, because they are, I hate to say it, orchestras are a very traditional organization because they operate on the traditionalist mindset of the European orchestras. And this was some of what I talked about in my dissertation even, was that this traditional mindset is actually making orchestras fail. And so here's a pandemic, a racial reckoning in the US, name your crisis that we're going through.
All of them.
All of them. And we've got orchestras or nonprofit organizations that are still digging their heels in and saying, I'm not going to change. And I actually saw, I listened to Brene Brown's podcast because I love her. And she had someone on her podcast and recently, and he was talking about businesses and all of that. And he put it really directly of saying that organizations, like, if you're not willing to change at this point, just get out of the way. And I was like, that's a good statement.
And I will endorse Brene Brown as well. I love her.
I love her.
Yes. So are you able to handle digital content? You did the weekly releases. What else?
Yeah, we did the weekly releases. We have a YouTube channel of some recordings, but we had several conversations. When I say we, me and my music director, of, do we continue to offer digital content or do we not? This past year, we toyed with offering like live streaming at some of the venues that had the capability. But as a small arts organization, I turned to my music director and I said, we don't have the staff or the resources to handle this.
Yeah.
We just don't. And I'd love to be able to offer a live stream, but who's going to actually be available to press the button to start the live stream?
Right.
Like something as simple as that. Because I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm down dealing with patrons in the lobby. My community engagement manager is like selling tickets in the box office. He's backstage getting ready for a concert. And
Right.
our board members aren't going to be capable of doing that. So I'm like, who are we going to get? And we don't have the resources to hire another staff person to do that. So
For that purpose. Yeah.
yeah. So we have kind of transitioned away from like digital recordings this season, but we're trying to be more relevance, not the word, but we're trying to be more I guess out there on in terms of like
Visible?
social media. Yeah, like Facebook or Instagram, or my community engagement manager actually created a TikTok page for us because she's 22 and I'm like, you go for it. I don't have time to mess with TikTok.
Yeah.
So we have that. So like we've been focusing the digital content more in terms of that like marketing piece, like giving people snippets of what they might hear. Really revamping our website to make it more inclusive and more inviting. And so that's where we've put the focus into that digital content, because again, it's knowing our limitations, and our limitations are we're not a New York Phil, we're not a Chicago Symphony.
Right.
We can only do so much digitally. And if someone wants digital content, they can go watch the Berlin Philharmonic if they want, you know.
Yeah. And well, and again, I love that, because it also, you didn't mention this, but because I know this, I'm going to throw it out there and then let you talk about it.
Yeah.
You are relevant to your community. Like you briefly mentioned, you do music at breweries.
Yeah.
That's an amazing outreach. That's so fun. And that is not something that the New York Philharmonic would do.
No.
Right. So that is uniquely relevant to your community and the people in your community. Right. And it's a service that you can provide that would not be provided by another orchestra.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like so that series is called Symphony on Tap. And it was one of the ideas I came up with during the pandemic, because I said, we have to start from ground zero here and rebuild, and we need to take the music to where the community's at. Where is our community at? They're at the local breweries. And I mean, it's a military town. Where are we going to find our people? Drinking on the weekends or on a Thursday night. And so you know, are we taking a string quartet playing like Mozart stuff in a brewery? No. Like, we also know the environment, and we are very fortunate that we have 3 amazing musicians that can play jazz really, really well as classical. And so we have like a little jazz trio that we take to the breweries, and it's been highly successful. But yeah, I've taken a lot of time to really try and teach my board and my staff that we have to meet our community where they're at, and physically and virtually, and just also knowing that most people here don't understand the language of classical music. And we can't name a concert Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 6 because most people don't know what that means. And so we play with some titles, and it's not that we're not playing the classical repertoire. It just means that we're providing them something different, and we're providing them options. That was the other thing that I've been really kind of strong about, is saying that we don't need to get every single person to every single event that we offer. We need to offer a variety of things so that people can choose, because to me, failure is when you can't get anyone to touch you at any of your offerings. So let's offer a Symphony on Tap series, and those people may only come to the Symphony on Tap series. They may not buy a ticket to come to a concert, but the people who come to our concerts may not come to the brewery because they want the classical music concert. Or let's offer some chamber concerts, because some people may only want to go to those and not to the regular full orchestra concert. So it's knowing that this community, especially Fayetteville, we just have to offer a variety of things and see what works and what doesn't.
It's a little bit, it's moving beyond a colonial mindset, right? Instead of saying, we know what you need, we're going to offer what you need.
Right.
You're saying, what do you need?
Right. Yeah.
And how can I provide what you need, what you tell me you need?
Yeah.
And that's an important distinction across the nonprofit sector, rather than saying, I think these are the needs.
Yeah.
But saying, what are the needs and how can I meet those needs?
Right. So often I see so many nonprofits get established because of that I statement. Like, I want this, so I'm going to build this because I think that this is what the community needs.
Yeah.
And I think that it's not that there's anything wrong with that, but to me personally, I sit there and I say, well, what is it that the community needs and wants from us?
Right.
You know, we're an orchestra. So what does Fayetteville need from us? What do they want from us? And even so much as saying, going to them and asking, like, do you not want concerts on Saturday nights? Would having a concert on a Friday night be better?
Right.
You know, it's, and this came up in my dissertation too. It was, you know, I doubt that the New York Philharmonic has to look at the Yankees schedule to figure out when to schedule a concert, but I need to look at NCAA tournaments and football
I made that mistake once.
Yeah, exactly.
I scheduled a show the weekend of UK playing basketball and I never did it again.
Yeah.
I never made that mistake twice.
And could you imagine if I had a concert the same night as the UNC Duke basketball game that happened the other week?
Yeah.
We'd have no one there. There'd be no one there. And granted, that was a Monday night game. We don't tend to have concerts on Monday nights, but like, those are the things that I have to think about. Absolutely. And in the fall, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, we can't have, we're trying to lay out next season and we're doing a few smaller events and I'm proposing Thursday nights because I'm like, Saturday is college ball. Like and people care about that here, including myself.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I don't want this event on a Saturday. I want to put it on a Thursday night where people are more likely to come out because they may not have as much going on. Or Friday night is marching band because that's when the high school football games are. You know, we have to think about that with our youth orchestra too. It's like, we can't have youth orchestra rehearsals on Saturdays because of marching band practice or marching band games, I should say, or championships or whatever. So yeah, it's keeping all of that in mind and making decisions not based on what Julia wants or thinks needs to happen, but what the community as a whole needs and wants from us.
This seems like an appropriate time to point out that you and I together are wearing racer colors.
Are we really?
Navy blue and yellow.
I love it.
So go Racers, because yes. So here we are. I just noticed it when we were talking about basketball. I went, oh, look what we're wearing. Okay, so we're going to move back to management. So did you see a decrease in financial support during the pandemic?
Actually, funny enough, no, we increased our finances during the pandemic, which actually makes it a little bit scarier in the present day. So our patrons really came through for us and we raised a lot of money during the pandemic. And granted, we had no expenses because where does most of that money go?
Paying musicians, right?
And we didn't have that as much. So we actually were financially really, really strong. Got the PPP funding. We got several like COVID relief grants from like the North Carolina State Arts Council and from our local arts council. And so we had all this money. So right now we're financially actually really, really strong. But as I keep reminding my board, I said all of this funding goes away next year and we can't just rely on these grants to get us through everything.
Right.
So I actually think that this organization is going to have a harder time financially this upcoming fiscal year. Our fiscal year starts July 1, ends June 30th. And so I've been trying to gently warn my board that they need to step it up because we're not going to have all of this relief funding that we had the past 2 years starting next fiscal year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you've kind of covered this. Is there anything else? You rebuilt this organization from during a pandemic.
Yes.
What have you not told us about that process?
That it was really, really, really exhausting. It is, I credit myself with the fact that I am really good at bringing order to chaos. I am able to do that. But it's not easy, and it's not for the faint of heart. And I've made some mistakes along the way, and I've learned from those mistakes. I've done everything I can, but yeah, I'm burnt out at this point. I'm very burnt out. And there have been a lot of days during this process of rebuilding this organization of me sitting back and thinking, why am I even doing this? Like, what's the point? And I'm sure that there are probably several other people working in other nonprofit organizations that probably had the same question of like, why are we even doing this? What's the point? Like, and I would sit back and think like, orchestras are doomed. There's no way they're going to survive. And just like very negative mindset. And, I'd come out of that slump and I'd be fine. But it was very much a mental game of, I just need to get through to tomorrow. And I had no idea what tomorrow would hold. I had no idea what fire I'd have to put out. When you're working for an orchestra, you've got not only 65 musicians, but you've got staff employees and a board. And I felt like I was kind of babysitting everyone for the past year and a half, or filtering things, or like trying to meet everyone's needs. And it would get frustrating that it's like, no matter what I would do, someone's not happy. It's not good enough. And so I basically had to tell myself, I'm just doing the best I can. I'm just trying to get it back to a stable foundation. I'm going to change what I can. But it hasn't been easy. It has not been an easy job. And I'm very burnt out right now. Very exhausted. And, some people in my organization were trying to blame that on my dissertation. And I said, actually, no, my dissertation was my saving grace through all of this, because it gave me an out of that arena.
Different brain space.
Yeah. So I actually enjoyed working on my dissertation because I felt like I was making some sort of worthwhile change to our world by doing my research. And really, in the grand scheme of things, my dissertation didn't take up all that much extra time. It just was, I'd be working all day at the Symphony, and then I'd come home and I'd work on a dissertation, and then I'd go to bed and I'd wake up and hit the repeat button and do the same thing every day. So yeah, it's been hard, and I don't know where the organization is headed. But they're at least stable right now.
Yeah. So, as a nonprofit arts administrator, what has the pandemic taught you?
To be flexible beyond anything else. We can have our ways. We can say that we know what's best, but at the end of the day, things can change. And sometimes those things are out of our control. And we have to learn when to let go of control and let nature take its course, or rein in and say, how can I better control this, or how can I better serve in this capacity? I think that flexibility piece was really the biggest thing for me, because I am someone that likes to be in control.
Yes.
And this pandemic taught me that I can't always be in control, and I just have to go with it. But it also taught me the importance of taking care of myself first before I can show up for others. During the pandemic, I spent the better half of the first few months basically very isolated in Tallahassee, because I was still down there, and we weren't supposed to see anyone, and other than going to the grocery store and standing like far away from people. Like, I remember going into the Trader Joe's in Tallahassee and like only being one of 10 people in there, because that's all they would allow.
They would let in. Yep. Because my family of 4 couldn't go in together.
Right. Yeah. I remember. And so I'm like, that'd be the only human interaction I had for a solid like 6 months, other than something like this on Zoom or FaceTime.
We texted a lot at that time, as I recall.
We did. We did. Because you guys were, you were still in Tallahassee.
Yeah, we were there.
Point.
All 4 of us.
Yes. All together.
All together all the time. We went on a lot of walks.
Yes, I did that too. Yeah, and I think because I was I put myself into my work because I just couldn't handle the outside world. I
Yeah.
just focused on my work, and I think that's caught up to me now. And I've realized through all of this is that I tend to give my all to everything I do. And I'm realizing now that life is not all about work. And in the nonprofit sector, it's really easy for us to just dive in because we think we're doing a service for everyone else,
Yes.
which is important, but I can't serve other people from an empty cup.
Right.
And so now here I am completely burnt out, can't seem to get enough sleep no matter how many hours of sleep I get. And I'm realizing that this isn't the way that I can best show up in the world and for my job and for the nonprofit sector. And it's really, the pandemic has, really taught me that I have to take care of myself first before I can give back to others. And I feel like in the nonprofit sector, my hope is that other people start realizing that too, because I think that especially small nonprofit organizations, it's really easy for us to just go and just serve the organization. And at the end of the day, I'm now reminding myself that I don't owe my organization anything. I have to do what I need to do for myself first, so then I can show up better for the organization.
Right. Because you're no use to them if you're useless, right?
Yeah,
if you
exactly.
have nothing to give.
Right.
So, and I think this is really good for everyone that's watching this, that is a practicing nonprofit professional. We sacrifice a lot of folks on the altar of our mission.
Yeah, we do.
Including ourselves.
Mhm.
Because it's for the cause, and it's a valuable cause, and it is, they
Mhm.
are good causes.
Yeah.
But there are humans that need human care.
Yeah.
And the organization does not benefit from broken humans.
No. And if you work for an organization that does not put the humans that work for it first, there are going to be problems no matter what.
Yeah.
There will always be problems. And there's one nonprofit organization here in town that it's called the Dogwood Festival here. And so it's like a weekend long festival, and there are things going on all the time. And found out that the executive director is sleeping in a camper in the park downtown overnight because there's not enough time for her to go home between the events ending the night before and the events starting the next morning. And I heard that and I said, that's not okay. One, that's not safe. Mm-hmm. And two, you're telling me you're working so much, there's not enough time for you to drive the 5 minutes home to get some sleep, right, and come back. Those are the stories and the instances that I look at that and I say, we are literally abusing these employees that work for these nonprofit organizations when I hear stuff like that. And that's, to me, I'm not willing to stand for that type of behavior anymore, no matter how good the cause. And especially for a festival, like, to me, I always tell my employees at my organization, I said, we are an orchestra. We are not first responders. We are not saving lives. There is nothing we do that constitutes as an emergency. We're an entertainment. That's it. And I'm like, the last time I checked, no one died because an orchestra didn't have a concert. Like, and someone said the same thing about accounting. No one died from an accounting error. Like, it happens. Right. But yeah, the focus on, we give it our all because we are very passionate about the cause and the service we provide. And if we're not taking care of ourselves, it's hard you lose that focus. And that has happened to me more than once of, I losing sight of that focus and realizing that I have to take care of myself and my employees too. Yeah.
So I'm so excited that we had this talk. This has been so great. What do you want to leave us with? What did I not ask you that you really wanted to share with us?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I suppose the only thing I would say is yeah, I think it kind of, ending on take care of yourselves first, really start to reflect on, on yourself, and are you taking care of yourself? And, is the organization an employee centric organization? Are they taking care of their people first and foremost? Yes, the cause is important, but so are the humans that make it run. And no matter how small the town, that is something that I think we need to be more focused on moving forward. And yeah, it's like it was called the great, what was it? The great, not the Great Recession, but the Great Resignation.
Yes.
The Great Resignation that's been happening. And reading articles on that and seeing how people are saying, well, people are just lazy, that's why they're leaving their jobs. No, that's really not the case. People are leaving because they're sick and tired of being mistreated in their organizations.
Yeah.
So, and the nonprofit,
that's for-profit, nonprofit,
all over.
Yeah.
And the nonprofit sector has seen a huge drop in employees over the past year because of the burnout, because they're not being treated right. People are saying enough is enough. And so as nonprofits, I would be, if I were like a consultant coming into an organization, that would be my number one thing, would be, we need to look and see how we're treating one another first.
Yeah.
It's even something as simple as that we had our season finale concert last weekend. So I brought a Keurig coffee machine and a kettle and tea and Starbucks coffee and bagels and donuts for the musicians backstage.
Yeah.
Just as a thank you. And I had so many musicians come up to me saying, this is so nice. So many orchestras don't even bother with this for their musicians. We're just hired and we leave. And this was amazing. Like, you guys didn't have to do this, but you did. So thank you so much. And I said, well, without you, we wouldn't have an orchestra. So.
Right. No, those little things really, when I was running a summer program, and you work all week with children and it's exhausting and it's rewarding and it's exhausting.
Right.
And by Friday you're done and you're ready for them for a weekend. And we were in a small town with nothing. And so I had some folks that were in a different small town, but they had a McDonald's, and they would come through in the morning and I would take orders for everybody. They would pick up something for everybody, like an iced coffee or whatever they wanted. And so it became something everyone looked forward to. Every Friday they got their treat, and it got them through that last day. And it cost me like $10 to get everybody a special thing off the dollar menu. Like it was nothing. Yeah. And it made such a difference.
Exactly.
And so those touches of just remembering the humanity in people are so important.
Yeah. So important, especially now, because I think that as a society, we are just dealing with so much crisis, so much trauma. Some people are taking the time to take care of themselves during these hard times, and other people aren't. And it's what we can do as organizations to really take care of one another, I think will help set the stage for a better working environment moving forward.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Julia Atkins, thank you so much for this conversation.
Of course.
It's been wonderful.
Yeah.
And thank you everyone for participating in Philanthropy Week, and have a great night.